She was already there the first time I visited the shelter. She was one of them, 10 in total, born on the street by a stray mum. Their mum would turn out to be one of my favorite dogs years later, but that day I barely remember her. She was one of the many faces in the kennels that are just that, faces, without a story. I do remember that day as if it was yesterday, though. And the dogs whose faces stuck with me that day would stay with me forever, and each one of them would become an example of everything we do wrong with dogs. Petra became, for me, an example of what life on the streets can do to you. It can start eating you from the inside, slowly, day by day, until you become a shadow of what used to be a dog. She also became an example of how there's no dog that can't be fixed, no matter how feral they grew up to be and how fearful of humans they were when you met them. Jasmine became another example of what life on the streets can do to you. It might not slowly devour you day by day, it might just break you in half in 1 second. Minnie became an example of how overwhelmingly sad cuteness is when combined with pain, of how unfair it is for babies to be born unwanted, only to suffer. Elias became an example of how dogs that don't look good get stuck behind, no matter how needy, affectionate, or simply good dogs they are. And she became an example of nothing, not on her own anyway. Her as part of a whole did. Entire litters of puppies, 5 of them, 7 of them, 10 of them, became a symbol of how difficult it is to distinguish the individuality in such large numbers. It's almost impossible. Most photos I have of her and her siblings are photos where they're all together. And there is power in those photos. They symbolize so much, and I've used them and reused them to talk about stuff that have nothing to do with her because there's no individuality in those photos. At some point we attached helium balloons to them and the whole thing was so cute. But again, no individuality. They were lost among each other, lost in the crowd. There's only this photo that's different. One of them had had enough of the photo shoot and went back to the kennels, waiting for someone to open the door. I'm sorry to say that I've no idea who that puppy is. They were pretty much indistinguishable back then, but I like to think it was her. Christmas was around the corner, so we had them all pose with signs stating their New Year's resolutions. I only remember another volunteer bringing them in one by one. I couldn't tell them apart. To me, they were just models for my video idea. I was only hoping it would help them find homes. Looking at that footage now, I can definitely tell her apart. She had the same grumpy face back then as she does now. Of all her siblings, she was the easiest to film. She just sat there with her sign saying that her new dad would let her share the couch. And it just happened that the sign I randomly picked for her was spot on. She looked like a couch girl. She didn't get adopted that year. Nor the next one. It's funny, I don't remember her as an older puppy. I just remember looking at her one day and seeing a fully grown dog. And somehow in that way, she has remained in my mind that tiny baby that I had first met. Years went by, 6 to be exact. Her New Year's resolution never came true. Well, it hasn't come true yet, but the fact is that she has spent nearly half her life there. The only reality she knows is the shelter, her kennel mates, the area next to the kennels where the dogs are let out, and that's pretty much it. 6 years. Puka is a dog that if you saw her anywhere outside in nature, you would call her feral. You can still call her feral now. You approach and she runs away. Feral, or as we call them, fearful, but the correct term that holds the truth is institutionalized. She has lived her whole life here. She recognizes only this place and only the 3-4 people that are regulars in the shelter. And that's not all. The place she is familiar with has to be combined with the people she is familiar with. Take one of the two elements out of the equation and she's lost. Whether she's in this place with strangers or in a strange place but with people she knows, she's just lost. And that's the case for the majority of dogs that grow up and grow older in shelters and whose stimulation has been so limited over the years that not only they don't know what else is there in the world, they don't even know how to process new information about that world, no matter which way you try to present it to them. There's something about her that makes you feel sorry for her, for all the missed opportunities she's had, for the lost years in her past, for her lost childhood. She brings out an overwhelming feeling of guilt because although we promoted her again and again and again, it's just happened that she never had anyone interested in her, literally anyone, never. You look back at those photos of the 10 puppies and you realize that chances were one or two of them would be very unlucky. It just happened that it was her, and it's the unfairness of it all that chokes you. Why her? Why anyone, for that matter? The randomness of bad luck when you're in a group so bound together, so identical in its parts, is heartbreaking. Statistically, it makes sense. Morally, it makes none. This year, we photographed some dogs again in front of the Christmas tree. Some puppies, some adults. One of the dogs I picked was her. And seeing her pose, actually freeze there, brought back the image of that 2-month-old puppy. One thing hasn't changed about her, and that's her ability to sit still and pose. She wouldn't be the same dog had her wish come true back then. Had she been adopted and spent her nights on a couch instead of a kennel, she wouldn't be this Puka we know now, but someone else. Being forgotten is what defined her story, her sense of self. It's sad that her individuality had to shine within the sadness of her being the one stuck behind. But hey, at least it did.